All right, everybody, I'm going to go over these notes with you in this manner today so that you can learn a little bit about viruses and understand what I've given you here, this link, okay? I thought this was a good link. I don't have a virus note to share with you right now. Everything's at work. And so when I looked at this and I looked at the textbook, this is much better than the textbook, but I'm still going to refer you to the textbook. So just a few words here, probably not a few, I talk a little bit longer, but I do want to just give you some information on what you're seeing. So viruses are microscopic. Okay, so I thought maybe I could make that bigger. They're microscopic, so they're small. Okay, why are we covering viruses last? It's because they are not categorized as living at this point. So non-living is a very important point. Why are they not classified as living? Because they can stay dormant for excessive periods of time and they can't live on their own. So they require a host. Whereas a protista, even though it's a parasite, some of them are parasites, they can live on their own. But these guys here won't come back to life unless they have something living, a living cell associated with them, and they don't have a cell, okay? They're not even one cell large. So give it enough time, people might change their minds about viruses and whether they're living or non-living, okay? But, and then even with this COVID-19 scare or pandemic, it's not even a scare, it's a pandemic. I hear the media saying, how long can a virus live? And you have to understand a virus is not living. So when they say, how long can a virus live on a surface? They actually don't get that a virus is not technically in 2020 classified as alive. So the question is, how long can it stay on that surface and still be infectious? So a virus is non-living. It is infectious, okay? It does not display most of the characteristics of living things, all right? So characteristics of living things are things you would have covered in grade 10 and in elementary school, but things like, can it reproduce on its own? Does it require energy? All right, those things. Is it a cell large? Do not fit into the 6 kingdoms, so we don't classify them in there. Once they're inside a host, that's when they can reproduce. They require a host. Some can be harmless, others can kill the host, okay? So keep that in mind. And what is a host? It's the living cell that the virus requires to live in. So structure of viruses, this is something I wanted to go over with you. A virus is just DNA or RNA. Now, some viruses will have DNA, some will have RNA. So we're not going to get too specific on that. But the virus has this RNA or DNA inside of this strange looking protein coat, all right? So we see here influenza. Influenza looks a lot like, on the surface, it looks a lot like the coronavirus. So if you look inside, here's the DNA, and there's a protein coat with some glycolipids. So in other words, there's a little bit of fat around this, but typically we call this a protein coat, and they're calling it a membrane envelope. So notice there is no cytoplasm, there's no ribosomes, there's no nucleus, there's none of that. It's simply a coating with DNA. Now, what is the goal of the virus? The goal of the virus is to get this DNA into a living cell, and that cell will reproduce it. And that's when you get sick. So nucleic acid, it's either going to have DNA or RNA, okay? Again, and I just want to say this to you so you've heard it. Viruses can have really wonky things with their nucleic acids. So our DNA is double-stranded. They can have single-stranded DNA. And our RNA is single-stranded, and they can have double-stranded RNA. So you can see that they are highly evolved, okay? And they can have all kinds of different situations just with genetic material. And then around that is the capsid. So please note these two. These are very important terms. I'm going to give you some questions pertaining to this note. When I ask you about the structure of a virus, it's probably the most important thing you're going to get from this lesson. And it's the nucleic acid and the capsid. And then we can talk about the envelopes and the tails. So an envelope consists of lipids, which are fats, and are found only in some viruses, okay? And then some viruses have this tail. So this virus here is one that you're going to see if you decide you want to go into biology. This is a virus you're going to see very frequently, and it's the bacteriophage. So the bacteriophage is a virus that makes bacteria sick. So bacteriophage is not going to infect you or I. It is specific to bacteria. And in here somewhere, it'll very likely say that viruses are always specific to their hosts. Now, some viruses can transfer between different species, and the one that comes to mind for me is rabies. So you can get rabies, a raccoon can get rabies, your cat and dog can get rabies. So rabies is not quite as specific, but a rabies virus is not going to infect a plant. So in its own way, it is more specific. But a bacteriophage, look at bacteria, don't get it mixed up with bacteria. A bacteriophage is a virus that makes bacteria sick. Okay, so they've got their own set of problems to deal with too in that bacteria world. All right, in terms of viruses and their classification, we classify them according to size, shape, and type of genetic material. So let's take a moment here and just look at these shapes. This is helical, okay? So helical means rod-shaped, and you can see that's a rod-shaped virus. And then you can get your polyhedrals, which means many sides. So when you get these amazing 3D structures with many, many sides on them, those are called cubic or polyhedral. And then you can get a complex virus like a bacteriophage that has this sheath on it, and it actually has these tail fibers that look like there's something from outer space that's going to land here, okay? Outside of that DNA, remember that you've got your capsid, okay? And this one has an envelope, and this one has an envelope as well. Each different virus has different types of structures in terms of their envelopes. Lytic versus lysogenic cycles, okay? This is one of the last things I'm going to go through with you, but I want you to read through this. I just want you to understand that some viruses have different strategies at making us sick. So the lytic cycle here shows you that the virus, this is the virus, okay? And this is the living cell. So it binds to a cell. So let's just say this is a cold virus, okay? So the cold virus binds to the cells of your, some surface cells. So let's say it's binding to your nose cells, all right? And what it does is it puts its DNA into your cell. So we're going to see this DNA here in black. It's going to come into the cell. And now let's say the cells of your nose have now been infected. So the viral DNA enters the cell, okay? And what it does then is it makes more DNA. It makes its own DNA more frequently. So they're showing it to you in black here, in blue. So the blue DNA comes in, okay, after attachment, you've got penetration, and then you have the fact that the virus is now going to have its DNA replicate over and over again, okay? So that's stage 3. The viral DNA instructs the cell to make a new virus. Sorry, my phone again is telling me that it's in low power mode. I don't know if you get to see that, but it made it look very blurry. Okay, in step 4, the parts are then assembled, creating an army of viruses. So notice this, you've got all this DNA, and now the DNA is going to make a whole bunch of viruses inside that cell that it infected. Each different virus will have a different number of viruses it wants to make in terms of how many it thinks are enough. And then at the end, lysis occurs, and that's why it's called the lytic cycle, because lysis means to burst. The virus comes out, okay? And at this point, you're going to infect more cells, okay? So when the virus first infects you, you don't know that you're actually sick. You might start to get really sluggish around this point, okay? So you start to feel like something's not quite right, I'm under the weather. And then as this attacks new cells, and this happens over and over again, that's when you're going to start to be symptomatic. Okay, so for a cold, 2 to 3 days usually, okay, 2 to 3 days after you've been exposed to somebody. For COVID-19, it can be 5 to 10 days at this point, and they're saying maybe even up to 14 days, okay? So just be aware of that. The lysogenic cycle is a different strategy used by viruses altogether. So when we look over here, we see that viral DNA, they're showing it to us as pink in this diagram, okay? So the virus binds to the surface of the host and intersects its DNA, which means just injects its DNA into the host cell, okay? So we're seeing that here. Here's our host cell, and we're seeing the DNA here. This is your DNA, okay? This is the DNA, and here we're actually just seeing a bacterium. So this is the bacteria's DNA. This is the virus's DNA. So the viral DNA forms a loop. And then in number 3, the viral DNA instructs the host to make and assemble new virus parts. So we're seeing it's telling us in the lytic cycle to make more parts, and then we get sick. Okay, the lysogenic cycle is a very different thing. So in the lysogenic cycle, the virus is going to infect the cell, okay? And then what happens is it actually puts its DNA into the bacteria's DNA, into that plasmid. And so what happens is the bacteria copies the viral DNA over and over and over again. Notice we're not making virus particles. We're just making viral DNA, and the cell divides, and it's going to keep going and going and going. So what's the different strategy here? The lytic cycle basically says, and this is what the coronavirus is, as far as we know, we don't think it has a lysogenic cycle, but that could change as well. The lytic cycle says, I'm going to make you sick pretty soon. So you're going to get infected, and within, a week or so, again, not including the coronavirus, within a week or so, you're going to be sick. So if this was influenza, if this was a cold, you would be sick. If this was rabies, you would be sick. When you get these kind of viruses here, herpes is an example of this. It can stay dormant inside of you and you don't even know that you've been infected. All right? So HIV is lysogenic in many cases, and then the herpes virus is definitely lysogenic. So it stays in you, and in times of stress, then you get the symptoms. So in other words, cold sores come out in times of stress, okay? And what we do is we just keep replicating this DNA over and over again, and we don't even know that we have it. But all of a sudden, the symptoms show up, and it could be years down the road, okay? Different strategy for different viruses. This is lytic, this is lysogenic. All right, and then viroids and prions, you guys are going to read about this in your textbook, so it's here for you as well. Viroids are small infectious pieces of RNA. They're smaller than any virus and don't have a capsid, okay? So these guys are frequently, they attack plants, all right? So they, like it says, they destroy entire crops of plants. Prions cause a number of rare diseases in mammals, including mad cow disease. If you're interested, you can look that up. They have abnormally shaped proteins found in the brain and nervous tissue of mammals. So these guys are extremely dangerous. They attack nervous tissue. And what is nervous tissue? It's tissue involved with the brain and the spinal cord, all right? And your nerves as well. And then vaccines, single best discovery in terms of medicine ever. What we do with a vaccine is we take a virus that's no longer active, so you can take that DNA that we know is no longer active and insert it into humans or animals, whatever's getting vaccinated. And what your white blood cells do is they study it and they come up with, it says it's a chemical memory, they come up with antigens against that, and antibodies against this. So vaccines are weakened mixtures of dangerous viruses. When injected into individuals, the response is triggered by the immune system. So some people say, I'm not going to get the flu shot because I feel sick and I get the flu after. It's not that you're getting the flu, it's that your body's responding to that inactive form of the virus and studying it. So your immune system is working, but you're not actually getting the flu, okay? So it says it creates a chemical memory. So in other words, you're creating antibodies against something. Should you ever see it again, you've got a special army of white blood cells to work on that. And then here we go with some common viruses, okay? So please read through these. If you're interested, by all means, look them up.